Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening conversation session. Uh, I think there's a bit of an echo there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but I think you're fine. It's okay, inshallah.
Okay, so I think we can start. Um, just give me one more minute, one more second, all right.
No
So
problem.
all good. Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Nabiina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man taba sunnatihi ila yawmiddin. Assalamu alaikum to everybody and a great salam to Sheikh Ehsanullah Shah. Always refer to him as Ustad Muhsin, so it's a bit new, but then again, that's how I should be referring. And tonight, I think is the first session we're actually having a conversation session. And tonight's topic is on Tariqa and social change. And I think before we start, what I will do is I will give a very short profile of Khwaja Ehsanullah Shah, and then we dive right into the conversation session. Khwaja Ehsanullah Shah is a graduate with a master's degree in arts and social change and religious leadership from the Star King School for Ministry, which is in Berkeley, California. He is an educator, a Khalifa of the Qadiri Chishti Sufi order. He's also a counselor and consultant. He's certified by the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore through the Asatiza recognition scheme, and he has been teaching since 2012. The chain of tradition that guides his work and spiritual practices, they flow from the blessed lineage of the Chisti, Qadri, Naqshbandi, Shaharawardi, and Sanusiya orders. Over the years, Khwaja Ehsanullah Shah has studied and took benefit from various scholars in Singapore and other countries. He sat in different traditional learning circles, covered different Islamic sciences ranging from fiqh to tasawwuf. He also pursued his Islamic studies in the International Islamic University of Malaysia, where he attained a postgraduate diploma in Islamic studies. In 2014, he co-founded Being Center in Singapore, and the Being Center focuses on how Islamic spirituality can serve as an intervention for the challenges of city dwellers living in a cosmopolitan, modern, and rapidly evolving environment, who are especially vulnerable to the disruptions in the internal state of being. So Being Center actually combines domains from both the traditional Sufi methods of zikr and professional clinical counseling, and to help seekers find peace, mercy, compassion, and love in their lives. Um, I think we'll jump straight into the conversation session. And what we had planned before was that we'll try to break this up into three parts. And the first two parts, perhaps talk more about the problems that we face in the contemporary world in terms of social change at the individual level, family level, community level, and society level. And then talk about the problems of the use of religion or tariqah in a non-optimal way, and what are the challenges that come with that. And we'll devote quite a bit of time in this session to ask Sheikh Sanullah the practical steps on how to pursue tariqah and how to effectively pursue it. Um, so I think to start off, I will perhaps quote something which my teacher just sent me an hour ago. We're talking about the vaccine problem, or rather the vaccine debate, and one of the things he said was very interesting, which I thought would be relevant to hear. He said, um, he was talking. He sent through the Tafsir Baydawi, uh, which he's working on, and he was talking about how the subtle workings of the divine order of all creation in all matters. So he was talking. He was mentioning about how there is subtle workings in all the matters of the world, and therefore he was cautioning and was saying about how one needs to bear that in mind, and understanding the subtleties is a great challenge, and dealing with it is even a greater challenge. So, Sheikh Ehsanullah, can you perhaps, I mean, give kind of a kind of introduction to perhaps what you've been saying as the kind of problems of social change?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wa mursalin Sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. My beloved and respected Sayyidina Ansari, who graciously invited this fakir over for a chat, alhamdulillah. Blessed viewers and muhibbin and muridin of Basmala, Australia, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam.
Alhamdulillah. What are the problems and challenges? Social change, it's not something which is new. Something has been practiced for a long time, in fact. And I did a talk before the month of Maulid called PPSC, Positive Prophetic Social Change. And I just wanted to bring in the Islamic element of social change, because it is something which is actually prophetic. And if we look at it, social change is not trying to change a community only, but it is actually a way of directing a community. And for me, I would say it is directing the community towards divine presence. And because if we talk about towards the divine, then there are many theological questions. So I think it'll be easier if we say it's towards the divine presence. And in that sense, it can be open to many levels and layers of communities as well. And going back to what Sheikhna has mentioned about the subtleties of working, at the end of the day, the subtleties must translate to presence. Social change has an element of knowledge, of course. Everything has knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, if we wish to have dunya, we must have knowledge. If we wish to have akhirah, we must have knowledge. But you're on, Sidi Ansari? Seem to have lost you. You okay? Ansari, we have you? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Okay, it's okay. Yeah. So what I was
continue.
Okay, talking about the subtleties. So this is where Tariqa comes into play when we talk about social change. I mean, of course, if we look, a lot of fuqaha have caused a lot of social change as well. But if we look at their background, most of them are based spiritually anchored. They are spiritually anchored via Tariqa, or they themselves has achieved to a certain level of spirituality that their taqwa guides them, through and through. Now, when we talk about taqwa, we can read about it from many kitabs, especially like Abideen or Ihya al-Ulumuddin, because the crux of the works of Imam al-Ghazali is inevitably about taqwa, and because that is Islam at the end of the day, But how do we apply this in the context of where we are and what we're supposed to be doing and the life that we lead in today's day and age? If we read Minhajul Abideen itself and we go like, how am I going to apply this? This is where, for me, I personally feel Tariqa has made it into different stages that people can move through bit by bit. And the pool is that allows people to go through is the silsila, or the lineage that comes along with it. The problems are always there in today's day and age. If you were to talk about it, I think it has a lot to do with the lack of understanding of traditional Islam, or there's an argument whether it's traditional or Orthodox Islam. So we'll stick to the word traditional. Traditional Islam in understanding the importance of spirituality. Much of the discussion I have here when I'm doing my work is people still have a lot of doubts whether they have a spirit or not. Whether, in Islam, the basic akidah is we have both physical and we also have a ruh. But there's a lot of doubts whether, do I actually have a ruh? What does the ruh do?
Can I interject here? Can I
Yeah.
ask, is it because they can't experience it? Is it also because of the mind being more active than the ruh, where they keep thinking too much, but and the mind can't feel the ruh, and they're trying to analyze everything
Mhm,
through the mind,
mhm.
especially in an information age. I mean, like basically the mind is the one that's really working 24/7, like 60 seconds every minute.
Yeah. Actually, it's true. I personally feel that when people come for classes, whatever classes may be, I spend most of the time just trying to realign their definitions. And that hasn't gone into the work itself. That is just defining things. And, example, the difference between being positive and having faith. And this is something I go through almost every other class because, positivity is something which is based on the self. I'm positive about my good characters, or my plus points that I have in myself, etc., etc. But having faith expands the. Oops, Ansari, I lost you again. Are you around? Okay, you're back. Hello, I can't hear you. Salam.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you?
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So what we were saying, most of the time, example, the difference between being positive and having faith. I think for Muslims, especially when it comes to adding tariqah and social change, the first definition for a lot of tariqah teachers, they must be clear with their students or in trying to create change, is that we're working with faith, not working with positivity. Because positivity, in a sense, you're positive about a certain object, about a certain thing. And here in the case, it's about the self. So there's always an overlap between self-help and tariqah. Tariqah is not self-help. And there's a lot of teachers or guides or mashayikh, they're trying to sound relevant by using self-help terminologies to teach traditional kitabs. And that doesn't work. Because
And also in the world today, again,
Mhm.
coming back to the information age, the social media,
Yeah.
people have all these tools where they have a kind of a false confidence that they can seek self-help. Like basically, I can analyze, I can read, I can learn, I can.
Mhm.
um,
But it's very different with the rule. It's very different with the rule because the terms that are used by the mashayikh in terms of tariqah, and if I may use the word Sufism, is that it is them trying to explain to us what they experienced and what they understood through journeying. And journeying itself has another component because then that is based on the practical aspects, which we want to discuss much later in this talk. But we cannot just say I've understood Tariqah, because when we say we've understood Tariqah, we've understood it in terms of its books. But in terms of its journeying, that's number one. Number two is the effect of the journeying on the self. And that's where change happen at a micro and a macro level. So if we're trying to work with Tariqah for social change, then one must understand the effect it would have on the self and as a community level. And of course, the fruit of Tariqah is adab, which then goes back to what Imam Ghazali has been talking about, the root of all of his teachings, and the root of the teachings, even Shaykh Akbar Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, the root of all of the mashayikh who are teaching about tariqah is actually character, the mole of ahsan taqwim, the most beautiful creation, that the original fitrah that we have in terms of character, to receive the tajalli from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
so in coming back to the very beginning, so for example, if a person wants to pursue social change,
Mhm.
they need to first understand what that means, like what is social change.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Even though it might sound rhetorical, but
Yes.
a lot of things in the world of information don't deliver the meanings.
No, they don't.
And then also in terms of journeying, or rather proceeding using spirituality, um, and then I mean, like then moving on to Tariqa,
Mm.
again understanding like the meanings, and also understanding the journeying, like basically a roadmap, or if not, even without a roadmap, a guide,
Mhm.
uh, um, and also, I mean, and I think more importantly, disconnecting from the chaos, or disconnecting from, or moving back,
Correct.
withdrawing and contemplating,
Correct.
and moving forward with a plan and with a guide.
Mhm.
Um, so that in today's age, that becomes a lot more critical.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
so in the, say, 100, 200 years ago, a person doesn't need to de-link with so many things, from his phone to his information to his whatever is, and then start. I think
Yeah.
today a person has to kind of switch off to switch on.
I mean, going back to what you've mentioned, even when we were learning social change in school, most of the time, our professors and our teachers, our lecturers, what they were doing, they were actually guiding us to understand the different gaps in society. So social change isn't about fighting for all, for everything, because we have to. Yes, there must be change in society for goodness. So there's different things that sprout out. Positive social change, positive social transformation, all these different things, lah. But some of the activists, how they define social change is as eco, is like education to counter oppression. And so this then springs into example the liberal movement and different things. But at the end of the day, if we look at it, to counter oppression is something that has been done by a lot of different people in that sense, like Gandhi, and we got Martin Luther King, and we have a lot of different, these are the people that we go through in school in that sense. But at the end of the day, what is the positive social change that I hope to see in my community? For me, that's why I pick spirituality. So it was a combination of trying to adapt Tariqa practices to a very urbanized community in Singapore, Misal, or even Malaysia, and to see its relevancy. And that's where I start to realize that there is a huge gap. People think they're teaching spirituality, but actually they're teaching motivation. People think they're teaching spirituality, tasawwuf or tariqah, but actually they're teaching self-help. And that's where I realized there's a huge disconnect with using example al-hikam of Ibn Atta'illah and trying to use the terms and the aphorisms of Ibn Sidi Ahmad ibn Atta'illah to help the seeker to understand his method of wayfaring, because the methodology is lost. It's lost in trying to adapt to modernity, and it is not something that needs to be adapted. It's something that is used to actually cure, and a lot of so there's a lot of overlapping. There's a lot of healing that is needed to be understanding as well. Different levels of healing. So common thing. We all need to go for ruqyah, and then after that, then when we do ruqyah, then they realize, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. It's not just a person reciting Quran on you, but there's a whole process. So that's one form of social change as well, which is needed. The raqi, the people who recite them, and that also has become people who just, we don't need people to recite, now we just play YouTube. So the sacredness is missing. The ideals and realities are also missing. And one of the greatest signs of the end of times is that people have lost the use of intention. And I think social media and whatever that we face today's world has made us lose the art of refining our intention, which is actually the fundamental of Islam. If you look at it, it's 1/3 of the religion is said by Imam Nawawi, rahmatullah alayhi. So then you've mentioned two other things. So that's the first part, the social part. Then the change part, there's two aspects. understanding Tariqa and its pillars, its etc. It's, what do we need to do, and then finally actually getting down to do it. So yeah,
We will come to that in a while.
yes, correct,
I
yes.
still want to discuss a bit more on the struggles of social change. I mean, like, I know it seems like we're kind of going around in circles, but it's not really. It's just um, pursuing social change is complex,
It is.
and and often amuses me when a person looks at another person, especially online, and um, mocks and scorns about their understanding about an issue. Um, like basically, in a problem, especially these days, a lot of the problems, there's so many subtleties
Mm,
and there's so many dimensions to it. Um, one cannot just look at another person and start mocking and saying like, you don't know, I know. You
correct.
know, the other issue is, like for example, when you ask them to define the problem, like how often can anyone define a problem perfectly? I mean, the problems today are so complex, like you can't even individually with your own mind and with your books and with your internet be able to define it perfectly. Um, and and so that's a good beginning. Just trying to understand the problem itself requires help.
Mm-hmm,
Um, uh, um, and the other thing is rushing into solving the problem, feeling very empowered by all the tools that today's world gives.
mm,
Um, I think that gives a very false confidence about anybody and everybody can solve every problem.
correct.
Today we're seeing a kind of also a sense of rage. It's almost like the 70s kind of rage era, even bigger, I would say. So much of rage about how things are happening in the world, and also a sense of rage about how they can't change it, or also a sense of rage against those who are trying to change it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, so that's another question I have. Can rage change? It might sound rhetorical, but I mean, like, often makes me wonder. Is like, why is there so much of rage that's being channeled at one
mm-hmm,
another, especially on a internet? You can see. I mean, like, an alim comes. I mean, some of this rage is targeted at authority,
mm-hmm,
authoritative figures in Islam, and then
mm-hmm,
uh, um, and when you wonder, this mob lynching against a certain person who's trying to do something, right or wrong, he may be. Um, Ultimately, Allah is above him.
mm-hmm,
Like, what's the use of that mob lynching?
right.
Um, and so I think even like people starting off in trying to move in this social change ambition don't really start off. They're pretty much moving behind.
Yeah. Um, Actually, a lot of misconception is that when it comes to social change, these people, it's as though they are like rebels. Not necessarily. They are actually, um, there's the activists. They're not necessarily angry people, but activists supposed to have a cause. And if we look at it, religious leadership is about that. It's not just about guiding people in prayer, but it is about guiding people to become prayer. And that's, to understand that they have the ability to be remembrance in that sense, and to remember the all divine. Why I think there's a lot of rage, my personal point of view is that there's very little circles that create peace, and even sacred places are now have become so urbanized that the element of peace is missing. And if we look at our prayer, I mean, after prayer, what we do is Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam wa ilayki a'udu salam fa'ina rabbana bisalam. We said this prayer from the Prophet Sallallahu Allahumma anta salam, wa Allah, you are peace, wa minka salam, and from you is peace. And we hope that you place us in the abode of peace. So religious leadership is actually drawing people to peace, but at the same time, to become Ibadur Rahman, the servant of the All Merciful, requires a lot of work, and that's where the change happens. The social change happens. But I feel this is this that we lacking a lot of the social spaces that causes the loss of sacred identity. And sacred identity is really, really important. I feel what saved me was the majalis, the gatherings of Yasin and Tahlil that we had to go through, that we were forced to go through when we were young, or the different, there are times in the year that we are forced um, to dress, traditionally, the importance of it, um,
Or
you
on
know,
certain days, certain nights, certain
exactly,
moments after Asar,
exactly,
certain
yeah, or even for prayer, 5 times daily prayer, we would be reminded, where's your kufi, where's your, how do you
and
pray
and
this?
and that is a very interesting thing because, like, especially like growing up in um, for a kid to grow up in Australia,
Mm,
we, that what you earlier were mentioning, the the gatherings of peace is very
mhm,
limited.
mm.
So dressing up for it, um, putting time aside,
Mm,
um, after going for that event, sitting down together as a community or as a family and sitting down having a meal together, breaking bread,
mhm,
sharing food, and a lot of these things are missing. And sometimes I don't know whether people are trying to fill that void by going online every day and just
mhm,
having a big forum about every topic.
mhm,
And in those topics, I mean, they often turn into a big brawl. It's full of rage. People are throwing insults at each other without even realizing they're throwing insults at each other.
mhm, mhm,
Uh,
mhm.
um, and arguing without even knowing what the topic they're not even trained in those topics.
Exactly, exactly.
And you can clearly see the person who's asking doesn't know um, even less than the person who's answering,
Mhm, mhm.
and the person who knows even less is answering those questions.
Correct, exactly.
And this
So
is
that is why I feel if we look back, our previous scholars, how they address social change, because I think at one point of time, our scholars understood that the community is getting bigger. And when they understood the communities are getting bigger, they release manuals. If you look at the interesting thing about literature, is that a lot of our awrad and the Yasin Tahlil and Maulid books, they were once very, very, it was like a kept secret for close murids. And then later on, it was so widely spread because they understood that a lot more people could have benefited from it because of the morality of the people slowing. We are slowly losing it to dunya lah, basically. Not that we're against dunya, but we choose to live in dunya with zuhud, and that again is also social change. Zuhud is not just it's not just for people who are awliya, but zuhud is practically for everybody. And I think it's interesting that there is a pop culture going revolving around zuhud in today's world. And you have people like Mary Kondo. I don't know if you've heard of her. But she practices about practically how do we arrange and order our things, and what are the things that we need, and how do we live with what we need only. And practically she became a millionaire just by doing this. So Mary Kondo and being happy. So if we look at it, that is like an initial stage of zuhud that has been taught by Imam Ghazali, etc. Using what we need, arranging our times, arranging our things, and that's very prophetic actually on the Prophet ﷺ. But it has to become pop culture before it's widely accepted, and that's really interesting. When I was looking at it, how some of these practices which were shunned before, back in the 80s or even 90s or even 70s, where we were hoarding and we were basically we're still hoarding till today, but we have hoarded so much that we know that now we cannot hoard anymore. Yeah, we've come to that realization. It's like we're teenagers now. We used to be children, and now we're teenagers trying to figure out whether I have a spirit or not. It seems that the Ummah is going through that stage right now, growing up.
certainly in the last 20 years, I would say there's a greater conversation about spirituality in the
Mm,
West.
mm,
Um, in Australia, I mean, I've been here for 11 years, and I must say there's a seriously an increasing conversation about spirituality.
mm,
The word tasawwuf was not very widely used when I first arrived, and now I'm hearing a lot more. The word Tariqa has come into the jargon.
mm,
Previously, people would tell me, you don't use the word here.
mm. No, no,
um,
eh?
no, no.
No.
I said, well, isn't this supposed to be a free country? Like,
Mm.
I can use any word I want.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Um, anyway, so in terms of that itself kind of shows the struggle of people experiment. I mean, like even before taking a step into the tariqa thing or spirituality, people are experimenting with everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So in the last 100 years, there's so many different types of Islamist groups that has formed
mm-hmm,
and other kind of groups. They're all closed ideological groups. If you
mm-hmm,
look at it from a political science perspective,
mm-hmm,
and so many different other types of experimentation has happened.
mm-hmm,
Uh, um, so it leads. The concept of experimentation is not just new when people wanted to go into spirituality. Even
mm-hmm,
before that, they've been just when they want to pursue social change, whatever, they just start experimenting with so many different things. Whatever
mm-hmm,
they hear a speaker talking about a movement, they get so excited. Okay, we're going to use that for social change. They see a political leader coming forward and say, we're going to make this into Western Europe. They believe
mm-hmm.
into him and they run after him.
Correct.
So
Correct.
similarly, when this whole last 20, 30 years, when the topic of spirituality comes, there's also a lot of experimentation. You've already touched on it.
Mm,
Um, I mean, like, which then makes it difficult for a person who don't have a lot of resource to try and then find the way forward.
mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
so, for example, you've got the whole Sufism versus Selfieism.
Selfie, right?
Selfieism.
Yeah, correct.
Um, all these kind of things that's going. So, for a person who's starting off, coming back to the meanings, the word of tariqa itself in Australia, for example, 9 out of 10 people will not give you a consistent meaning.
Mm-hmm,
At least 5 out of 10 will give you a meaning that's full of uh, um, prejudice, I would say, and bias. Um, so, what would be the definition of tariqa?
the definition of tariqah, and first of all, I agree with you, Sidi Ansari, because there's so much to filter out before we actually come to the point, okay, where do I actually start working? And that's why I did a class called EIS, Essential Islamic Spirituality. And it was actually based on questions that I got from a class called Purification of the Heart. So my classes are based on questions that people ask from previous books. And so it was interesting that it took us almost like 5 books to come to a proper understanding and definition of purpose, definition of tariqah. And the one that I think it sits very firmly in the tradition of Islam, Iman and Ihsan, is that tariqah, in terms of definition, word literally it means path. By definition, it means to lead one to taqarrub ilallah, to be close to Allah. So if one says tariqah, it means this, to be close to Allah. And this is what a seeker should have in mind if when seeking. So let's say, example, one has not had any contact with any tariqah, maybe in Australia or wherever that someone's listening in. Then the tariqah should be, how do I get close to Allah? So this reading example, this book that I'm reading, does it bring any example, any book I open an Islamic book I read, does it fit that definition of tariqah? Does it bring me closer to Allah? And then if it does not, then put it aside for a while. It might come in handy another day if you have some questions. Maybe it's a general book or something like that. But one would start to be mindful, using the term mindful, of what brings me closer, taqarrub ilallah. So, and that's the very fundamental meaning of tariqah, or the definition, which is to bring one closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and of course, that is a counter to the selfie thing, which is to bring closer to the self, not to Allah.
Well, even the selfieism culture that I'm seeing is very interesting also in the sense that I mean, I've kind of observed this. I've found that partly is they participate in an activity, a zikr or a maulid or a attendance with a sheikh or an alim,
mm,
and then they get a certain level of closeness with Allah, and then they become very contented with that.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
So the contentment often leads to the selfism, I find.
mhm.
So I mean, it's not in all cases,
Yes, yes.
but I don't think it, on the outward, some people might think they're just jumping into, seeking attention for themselves.
Mm, 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 mm,
But I think underlying that is they kind of living in the past of a certain contentment they achieved back 2 years ago, 3 years ago,
mhm,
when they attended something or they met somebody,
mhm,
and in between, it's not like a daily. Um, so when you talk about gaining proximity to Allah, being in the presence of Allah,
mhm.
is it something that you do once every 6 months? And I think that becomes a big question. That's
Yeah,
also, I mean,
I
or
think
is
I
it like a
think
daily? Is it?
of course. I mean, it has to be daily, if not minimum. Um, and this is making it this I mean, for today's context, I don't think this would run with our scholars of the past, but minimum at least having a spiritual practice once a week. And I base this on the explanation of Imam al-Ghazali in his Bidayat al-Hidayah, beginning of guidance, when he said, make Friday your day of worship. But that whole book talks about how you should worship Allah every day, but he asks us to single out Friday in that sense. So
That starts with Thursday night,
correct,
which
correct.
is in Australia the longer day for shops. So shops close at 5, except on Thursday they close at 8 or 9. So that's shopping
Oh,
night.
they too know about the barakah of
They
Thursday.
know, they know.
So if you're a retailer out there, you know what you need to do.
Mm.
Open longer on Thursday nights and ask people to come to your shop to read Yasin. Because that's what happened to me. Once I went for an interview at an Islamic institution at Arab Street, and somehow or other I knew I couldn't get the job lah for some reason. So I took a longer route and I entered Arab Street and walked down. And there was this cloth shop, or this, the shop that sells cloth lah, basically. And everything was closed, and then there was this man who says, "Can you read Yasin?" Out of nowhere. I'm standing in front of the shop. I said, "Yeah, I can. Okay, follow me." So I followed him, and we climb up like a ladder, which is practically outside of the shop house. The shop house is closed, so it's like an entry from the out. And when I climbed up, the whole shop house was full of men waiting together, and they were all. And the guy said, "Okay, we're going to recite Yasin for Shah Abdul Qadir Jilani." And what was interesting was I was part of that, not knowing who these people are. We recited Yasin for Shaykh with the great Sheikh, and then I left, and more than 15 years later, I'm back at the same street doing Yarwi every month. So the power of the Yasin is for the great Sheikh, and that's why intentions and ibadah comes hand in hand. So even if people are able to do it virtually once a week, or even once a week or once a month. I think that will have a huge impact on community. Although it is very subtle, but for that 1 month, for that 1 hour, we are away from sinning, and that's definitely something positive. So for 12 hours per year, we have done something good, and that will link us with the tradition, especially in the great Sheikh and Awliya Allah. So
So,
minimum
mm.
at least once a week, or for gathering at least once a month.
And this is quite a big challenge in Australia. I mean,
Mm,
the thing
mm,
is, people really struggle to set aside the Thursday night and the Friday, at least the Thursday night. Um,
mm,
I think partly the big challenge comes to also time planning. I mean,
mhm, mhm,
basically, I think be in tariqah or doing any amal or trying to draw close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be in charity or whatever,
mhm.
you need sacrifice.
Yeah, of course, of course, of course.
So until the person makes a big sacrifice, say that, okay, I will not do anything on the Thursday night,
Mhm,
most definitely something will occupy you.
Mhm.
And
But
so I think in terms of the Tariqa, it needs a lot of sacrifices.
this is what I was saying. You said something very important, sacrifice. Now, sacrifice is not known, and it must be shown. So what I feel, even this is something that we've heard even in Nusantara, as many as there are many great Thursday night gatherings as well. When people are starting out, I've heard of even Kiais, when they want to start out, and these are huge names. We're talking about like K. Asrari, etc. When they want to start out, there was no one, and this happens a few mashayikh as well. What they did was they take out their cap and they put the cap in front of them and they make zikr with the cap. Their kufi. They say, okay, this is someone here, and it is normal for groups to have like 0 or 2 attendees, and then it spikes and then it just disappears. And the person who's leading it, who's trying to gather everybody, must have that magnetic pull. And I feel this is where the, the personal ibadah comes into play. So the intention, and that creates that magnetic pull. So, and I'm speaking this even from my own, even in Singapore, it's just really not easy, and to maintain it, that's another challenge. So to start, to bring the people in and to maintain it is just a huge task. I'm not saying that both Singapore and Australia is the same, but I guess even like Majlis countries like Indonesia, etc., the islands will go through the same problem, same problem, and I think someone has to break that
Now,
first.
now in terms of like, so person, you know, when they're getting into the Tariqa,
Hmm.
they have a million questions in their head,
Of course.
and and a lot of apprehension, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of what this, what that. I mean, I've got a lot of people come and ask me questions for years.
Mhm.
Um, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? Including like, even not even to the level of taking bayah with a sheikh.
Mhm. Mhm.
Even before that, just hundreds of questions,
Mhm.
and I keep finding like you can't find those answers by just sitting there.
No, of course.
Um, so that journeying to find the answers. I mean, like I think the answers that people looking for
Mhm.
is only going to come if they journey.
Mhm. True. But to categorize this, we have a great scholar of so Sheikh Abu Said al-Kharraz, and he mentions that basically tariqah can be divided into four. And I think this is the basic four principles that I think everybody should really keep and be mindful about when they are in a tariqah. And number one is ibadah, worship. So when you enter a tariqah, number one, be prepared to worship Allah. And that's where the selfie generation, this is where you're talking about once in 2 years or something when the sheikh comes. But whether the sheikh comes or not, whether you're in a tariqah or not, if you want to be talking about the soul and spirituality and creating change, worship is number one. So the person must be anchored in worship, because this then must be the identity of the seeker. Because taqarrub in Allah, to be close to Allah, which then would translate into these four methods. So worship, number one, worship. Both fardu and the wajib must be held close. And then number two is actually mujahada, struggle. And the struggle is that we read in books of fiqh even, like how do we abstain from sinning of the eyes, sinning of the mouth, the sinning of the hands, etc. And these are basic principles that if one wishes to walk on the path of spirituality, be them just following Bidayah to Hidayah as a manual in that sense. Because Bidayah to Hidayah is a manual that is known to be crafting awliya. And this is based on the people who have read it. They just become awliya by reading the muqaddimah, the introduction, and they become awliya. We've been reading it for 10 times, still struggling with it. But it's good, alhamdulillah, because it is about struggling. And this is a very good counter to how we perceive the world today. Like we think it's going to come easy. It's not. So the struggle must have its methods, and this is where sitting with a sheikh would help.
So in terms of the struggles,
Mhm.
so with the million questions in the head, the thousand apprehensions,
Yeah,
helpline is the sheikh.
the helpline is the sheikh. No, in
Now,
any
how
sorry,
often should you call the helpline?
once in every 40 days.
Yeah, no, but another thing, put in like, given again the information age, there's so
Yes,
much
yes,
information that you can find.
correct.
Uh, um, should the helpline be used, or I mean, like, that struggle is quite a real struggle. I'm finding. I
True,
find
true, true. So
like
this is
people,
where
yeah.
going back to the worship is important. The sheikh must have imparted to the murid, example, methods to take away running thoughts, methods of zikr to take away anxiousness of feelings, the proper method of muraqabah, the method of the zikr in the heart, the zikr of the tongue, the zikr of the breath, and so all of this must be given to the murid first. And if you enter a tariqah, but usually it speaks about awrad and dua at the end is good, but the wayfaring part is not going to be easy because these are the tools that are used by Sufiyas to control the thoughts. And like the zikr, they have beats, example, dharab, basically which part of the body do you send the zikr to. And these are actually locations of nafsu, which causes the running thoughts, which causes us to just go and absorb everything that's on the screen, you see. So that is the reason why I say ibadah is important. So when you have the ibadah, then would the struggle be made clearer, because struggling with the nafs is not easy. And how do we attain the faith in that sense, the blessings from the sheikh? That is also part and parcel of ibadah. So if you were to enter tariqah for qasidas, I don't think that's the which
Well,
is the normal misconception, you see.
well, I mean, I think again it comes back to what I earlier mentioned about the contentment. Like,
Correct.
some people do find a lot of contentment in qasidas,
Yes, yes, yes,
and some of them find contentment in the majlis itself, just
yes,
having
yes,
100 people. Let's do a qasida and maulid.
correct.
So and so how does one break that, or how does one move away from that? So that's when the suluk comes.
This will comes in. So the contentment here, example, even the word contentment, qasidas bring peace and blessings. But what does the ibadah does, it is actually, it breaks down the inner self. So then we know how to focus. The next time we enter the qasidah majalis, example, then it would actually bring us to a state which is even higher. So, but at the end of the day, the common question I get is tariqah for everybody. And this is where tariqah then becomes a jama'ah, where tariqah has a larger purpose of throwing its net wide so that people don't forget Allah. But out of that, only a small group would be doing the suluk. So this small group would benefit from the presence of the many, and the many would benefit from the small group that are very focused on their suluk. But at least there is a group that are doing ibadah, and they are not foreign to the practices of tariqah. And when they are ready, when Allah opens up for them, that process of suluk.
So just to reiterate, so tariqah is for everyone
At a certain level, yes.
at a certain level, yeah.
Yes, at a certain level,
And
yes.
historically, I mean, you could see, like, when people withdraw to the masjids around the world, the person leading the zikr might be very well a murshid of a certain tariqah.
Yes, which is quite normal.
And the zikr they might be doing might be from very well be of a certain tariqah.
Yeah, exactly. Like in Nusantara, we have our zikr after our prayers. The 33 Allah anta salam minka salam. There is a whole sanad that reaches back to Shaykh Ahmad al-Kushashi, which is of a Shatari Sheikh from Mecca. And so then it went down to the ulamas of Kelantan that studied in Mecca, then brought it back, and then it became very popular in this part of the world. So it is actually a tariqah amal. If you do the full set in that sense, that's number one. Some of my teachers have mentioned that the Yasin and Tahlil that is practiced in a lot of Nusantara is actually of a Qadri wirid. It's a Qadri wirid. So a lot of Tariqah practices have become part and parcel of, even if people say Al-Mafura, Al-Mafura, little did they know it's actually a Shadhili wirid by Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, who took it from a Shadhili wirid. So it's a Shadhili wirid at the end of the day. And so no one, the one that really stresses on ibadah are the Sufis at the end of the day. And the one who stresses on social change are Sufis at the same time. One of the conditions of a murshid, if you were to look at some kitabs, is that the murshid must have a vision for the community. So the attachment to the sheikh is not someone, why? Because this does not, if the sheikh doesn't have a vision for the community, then he will become selfish. So if the sheikh has a vision for the community, then would the sheikh will start be giving out. It's a process of expanding of the sheikh in that sense. And this is a very true observation of the scholars of the past. So we're just talking about two. We still have two more. We haven't finished, which I think is interesting that you've managed to expand this. And yeah, so this one.
We've got another about 6 minutes. So let's try to wrap it up with a couple of more interesting questions. Like this one of the criticism that I've seen emerging in very recent times amongst people who they often remind me of, when we were in the national service, in the police or the military in Singapore, and it's the first day of swimming class, and people who can't swim, the sergeant says, okay, which group can't swim, stand on this side, and they stand there and they don't know, sometimes they don't know whether they should join this side or that side. They're afraid they're going to be punished, and then they jump into the water. They also very unsure, should I jump in, or one leg goes in, the other leg doesn't. So I think that's a big struggle among a lot of people are finding. It's like I earlier said, people who come to me and ask a lot of questions about joining a tariqa, they say, well, and partly responding to what they're hearing from the social media. So, for example, they say in tariqa, if you join a tariqa, you surrender your mind. You don't think anymore. So all these kind of misconceptions that are being spread. One way is certainly, like I said, go and often ask them, have you gone and experienced it yourself before deciding for yourself? If you're going to tell me that by joining a tariqa, you're surrendering your mind to your shaykh, well, how do you know about it? You listen to some guy on the YouTube, right? So aren't you surrendering to some guy on the YouTube? So I can use the same logic, right? So I say, go and find out for yourself. But the thing is that, I'll put it very bluntly, is joining a tariqa surrendering your mind to your shaykh?
Well, this is very
a tricky question, but I'm asking from the perspective of how the people understand it, where basically they can't think anymore, they can't behave anymore, they can't decide for themselves, they can't tell the difference between right and wrong.
Correct. So this is going back to definition. Definition of tariqa is to be close to Allah, which also then we would understand what then is veiling us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of the practices where the murids or muridas have to surrender their minds, or we hear about a learned man who wants to become a murid and he has to carry feces on his back and go to the market, are true because the sheikh sees that it is a hindrance for them to achieve greater insights, or basira, we call it, or the fruits of the dhikr. But also we cannot deny that in this day and age, there are people who are charlatans, basically. They misuse this as well. So I highly encourage seekers out there to spend some time with the group. Don't just jump into it. Get to know your people. And this is actually adab. This is adab, to know the teacher that you're going to sit with, understands, talk with his senior murids or his or her. It depends on whether you're sitting with the ladies. Ask them how is the sheikh like, etc. Another way is to do your istikhara, etc. If you were to ask me, I feel everybody needs Tariqa, especially in this day and age. So that's my perspective. That's why I'm giving this answer. Is to start seeking if there is a circle near you. Now, if there isn't, then look out for murids of other circles that the sheikh might be away, who might be far, and speak to them. And another way is actually even this. This is not highly recommended, but it has been mentioned by some scholars. Is that if you cannot find the people, then read their books. And I think Australia is one place where it's very difficult to be connected with people. But alhamdulillah, now we have Zoom, we have you as well.
Well, not me, but there are actually quite a number of tariqas here. I mean, like,
Yeah.
there is a very strong Fiji Indian, South Asian,
Mm,
Southeast Asian, even in the Middle Eastern Arab communities and so on.
mm,
I
mm,
mean, there are a lot of tariqas here actually, but it's just
mm,
that they're really small.
mm,
Often they tend to be really small, so people don't know.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and I mean, like, they're not that visible.
mm,
Those are the challenges. So they don't know where to. People don't know where to start.
mm,
And very often the kind of conferences or meetings or whatever they're going to are
mm,
not quite the places they tend to easily find. The ones
mm,
that are easily available isn't where
mm,
it's easily can be found. And I mean, it reminds me of Salman al-Farsi. I mean, where he
yeah.
actually went through a huge amount of struggles
Mm,
before he found Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
yeah.
And along the way, also, he was serving a person who he thought was a really great man. And this person was collecting gold from a lot of people who came
Yeah.
and gave him.
Yeah.
And he would give it to Salman al-Farsi and they go and bury it here and keep it there and all that.
Yeah. Correct.
And when he died, he found out that, the guy is a fake, is a fraud, is a
Mm,
spiritual abuser.
mm,
But Salman Farsi didn't give up.
correct.
He didn't lose hope. He didn't
Correct.
despair.
Correct. Correct.
So I think in this day and age, it's like, yes, there are all these spiritual abusers or whatever, the bad Sufis, who are always being presented on social media.
Correct.
But they are not the norm, or they're not the majority. They're not the.
Exactly.
I think that's what people tend to forget.
Correct.
They tend to, you know, uh, um, lose sight of the bigger number of good and proper Sufis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as Muslims, I think, I mean, like, we got to look at how the media demonizes us,
Correct.
demonizes the prophet, and
Correct.
and we stand up and always say, look, there's a good Muslim and a bad Muslim. Why do you keep looking at making an example out of the bad Muslim to be the representative of Islam? So likewise, why do you make out the bad Sufi to be the representative of Sufism?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And
And
so, final few questions, I guess, before we wrap it up.
sure. Sure.
In
No problem.
terms of someone who's got bad experiences, burnt out, going
Mm-hmm.
to the, what do they do next?
I suggest for those who have gone through burnout in Tariqa or bad experiences is to realign back through Tawbah. And this is something which I have been doing with the community for a long time, whether they are our murids or they are just muhibbeens, they just, are coming in and seeking in our khanqa. And I just want everybody to be clear that whether we're on Tariqa or not, we're all on the path of Tawbah. The problem is when we're not. So that's the social change perspective part. That something I like all tariqas to emphasize upon is that they also become centers of tawbah. That if anybody who wants to reset themselves, they could provide that. And I highly encourage that. Don't give up seeking, because you would actually see that whatever you've gone through, it might not have been pleasant, but it would have been important in molding us in the next step. It's never the fault of the tariqah, it's the fault of the individual. So there's always and these are small things that would help us to keep the knowledge evergreen that we've received, and to understand that why didn't his teacher or that teacher take care of him, etc. Everybody has a limit. At the end of the day, it is Allah who's totally in charge, and it could be our fault as well. What was it that what was our intention? So as we know, in Tariqa, it boils down back to the intention. May Allah protect our intention. That's number one. Number two is I encourage them to start understanding Tariqa, because we mature in our understanding as well. So maybe the experience would have also opened up a different dimension of Tariqa. And like I said, the 4 points, ibadah, mujahada, riyadha, and la maqsuda in Allah. So riyadha are specific practices that you receive and you do it for duration of time. And then the last part is la maqsuda in Allah. There is no other maqsud except for Allah. So keep to these 4 points, that ibadah, mujahada, riyadha, la maqsuda in Allah. These 4 points are really, really important for a salik, for a seeker, whether the person is on tariqah, especially when he's on tariqah, and when he's not on tariqah. And my advice is that, and to make a lot of dua, and to make a lot of dua, a lot of dua, in asking Allah for His contentment and His guidance. You would find it, inshallah.
And throughout the history, tariqas at different places have always brought in huge social change.
Yeah.
And there has been tribulation and challenges in those times, in those places. Nothing less than what we are having today.
Yes.
And people sought great help and benefited from it through tariqas.
Of course, of course, of course.
And I think that would be maybe another topic for another day.
If I may just recommend a reading for those who are seeking, if you don't mind. I actually recommend this classic. It's called The Sufi Bowl Feeling by his name.
Can you raise it up a bit? That author.
Oh, Hakim Mu'inuddin.
Just okay.
Okay. So he's not the Sheikh of Ajmer in that sense, but he took the name Mu'inuddin. He's an American convert. And I think it's really, it's a classic. It's been in print since the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, in 85. And it starts with health. What is health? Then it goes into the different grades of creation. So what it does is it actually explains a lot of the questions that a modern seeker would have. And not seeing the physical self as separate from the spiritual self. I think a lot of our seekers today, they see a separation. It's okay for me to treat my body however I want, because what I'm seeking for is spiritual. And then when they meet a health guy who practices yoga, example, and then they get very attracted to it because it talks about the physical self. But the Sufis have always placed an importance on what they eat. And that's very important. It talks about the 4 humors of the body and its effect, how it affects us. It even talks about the effects of zikr. So if you do zikr for a certain period, would you experience fever and all this kind of thing? So it's a very good book for people, I think, seekers in general to have. I mean, there's a lot of book on history. There's a lot of book on the ethics of Tariqah, but not a lot of book that talks about the processes and the effects of Tariqah on the self. And even talks about emotion, different things. Really, very beautiful book. I think everybody should just have a copy at home.
And if anybody wants to join the activities of your center, Being Center from Australia, what would be the best way? Facebook, social media?
As of now, we do everything on Zoom. So do write in and we'll send you the Zoom link. We do promote it. We do promote our events on Facebook, but we don't telecast it on Facebook for many reasons. Because the zikrs that we do with movement, and it comes with cognitive processes, and people might just, like you say, take it out of context, etc., etc. So, but Alhamdulillah, we do have people who Zoom in, from different parts of the world as well. So, of course, Australians are more than welcome. I see it as part of Nusantara for me, Australia. So we're not. It's really important that if we can help our brothers and sisters in Australia to find their way through dhikr, inshallah, of course. And all of our other things are all on YouTube. So if you missed it, we upload our dhikr weekly on YouTube as well.
And also, you've got a few resources, a few booklets.
Yeah, a few flyers, pamphlets, or booklets. Yes, correct. One of them is on stress relief, which is a very it's a core
Stress relief.
stress relief. Really, is a stress relief. No other title. It's called stress relief.
Very
Uh,
important for this time.
yeah, it is.
Actually, it's very important for any time.
Yeah, anytime, right? Correct. So it's a very small booklet. Talks about the clinical aspect of stress, very basic, and then it goes into different du'as. There are, and interestingly, what I've been doing is when people come in because of stress, I actually have to explain the booklet. So if you ever need explanation on the booklet, just give us a call, and we'll be more than happy, or just write in. Or we can always do an audio recording on how to recite the dua properly to have a better effect. Again, these are the small pointers that actually makes the dua come alive in our hearts, and that's really important.
So unfortunately, we've come to the end of the session.
We're just about to
Um,
run.
yeah. Frankly, I mean, like a discussion should go on for 3 hours. A Sufi discussion
Yeah,
should go on whole night.
but we have to go Australia for that then.
I do apologize for the 2 or 3 times the line kind of dropped. It just slowed actually. I'm using a few things at the same time, so they're just trying to talk to each other, and their hearts are not syncing, I think.
No, it's a test of it's a test of mujahada, so it's okay.
Mujahada, yes. I think maybe you could end this session with a dua, and I guess until we meet again, thank you so much for this session,
No
and
problem.
it was very beneficial. I think people who have more questions should seek more answers, and I think this session was just meant to give a kind of introduction to those who are not too familiar how Tariqa actually is beneficial and useful and needed and essential actually in this today's world for social change.
True.
So Sheikh, I'll pass it to you for a dua, a closing, concluding dua.
Alhamdulillah. First of all, I'd like to thank Sayyidina Ansari for organizing this. May Allah bless you in all of your da'wah efforts. So don't go too far yet. If you're in Australia, do look out for Basmala. I think that's really important. And the efforts that they've been doing, and because Basmala is very, very grounded in Australia as well, with all of their efforts in trying to link the different scholarship to come to Australia. So if you're listening in, if you'd like to support Basmala, I think Basmala deserves a huge support, inshallah. May Allah reward you, Sidi, for all of the work that you do, inshallah. And all of those who are being part of Basmala as well, inshallah. And I do apologize for any shortcoming of my delivery and lack of adab. I'm sure there is, so forgive us, inshallah, to meet again. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, we ask with the blessings of our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the great light that intervenes in the darkness of our life to raise us in all of our depression, in all of our anxieties, in all of our illnesses, to give us shifa, inshallah. Ya Allah, do not make us take this life for granted, and remind us and guide us and show us the light that is in our hearts, so that we will always be with the fountain of love with Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Guide us like how you have inspired the mashayikh and how you have inspired the awliya. Remind us always that we have the spark of divine origins in our hearts, Ya Allah. Do not make us fall into the abyss and the darkness of shaitanic acts, Ya Allah, but instead allow us to be swimming in the ocean of divine mercy, of all of the remembrance of the awliya and anbiya, Ya Allah. Make us the people who always remember you, and never make us people who forget you. Make us people who always are in love with whatever you have planned for us, and not make us people who are not contented with whatever you have placed in our life. Make us people whose hearts are constantly expanded to receive your tajalli, Ya Allah, and not make our hearts burdened with the worry and the anxiety of dunya, Ya Allah. Remind us constantly that our journey here is not to accumulate just dunya, but always direct us to be accumulating the tajalli so that we can pass the ihdina siratal mustaqim to be with your love, inshallah. Guide our husbands and our wives, guide our children and their children as well. Bless our family, Ya Allah. Bless our homes, Ya Allah. Bless our children and their children so that they will all be kutub al-awliya Allah salihin. Make our forefathers life in their graves full of like rawdatun min riyad al-jannah. Place their ruh with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Siddiqeen wa Shuhada. Give us the strength and the might of walking above all of the obstacles in this dunya, Ya Allah, like how you have granted this to all of the companions and the companions that have won through Badr wa Uhud wa Khandaq, Ya Allah. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Bless our friends who are in da'wah, Ya Allah, and bless the people who support them in their da'wah, Ya Allah. And make us always have true intention and sincere intention so that we will be guided with good intentions and that our work will be for us on the day of judgment and not be against us. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا محمد النبي الكريم الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thanks. Take care.